Hey guys, Miss Fearing here. Welcome to Unit 9 Notes 4. We're going to go ahead and look at multiplying rational expressions today. So our learning target is I can multiply rational expressions. So here are our steps that we're going to take when we are multiplying rational expressions. So basically when there is no adding or subtracting going on, those are not polynomials. We're just looking at regular monomials. So we are just going to multiply the numerators, or the top of the fractions. And then we're going to multiply the denominators, or the bottom of the fractions. And then our last step is to simplify the fraction that remains. For these problems, there's actually an extra step that we don't want to forget. That's going to be step number 4, which is to find our excluded values, or find our EVs. So just like before, anytime we're dividing, so anytime you have that division bar, we cannot divide by 0. So you have to tell me my EVs, or my excluded values, that would make my denominator 0. So let's go ahead and look at example number 1 right here. 5ab to the third divided by 8c squared times 16c to the third divided by 15a squared b. So there's a lot going on right here, but we're just going to follow our steps. We're going to multiply straight across on the top and multiply straight across on the bottom. So if I do that, I do 5 times 16, which is going to give me 80. And then I'm going to multiply the variables. And remember, when you multiply, you add the powers. So I have an a, and I don't have any a's on the other one, so I'm just going to keep it a. I have a b to the third with no b's on the other one, so it's going to stay b to the third. And then I still have a c to the third on top. So we're going to divide that by the bottom now. So I'm going to do 8 times 15, which is going to give me 120. Same thing, and I like to keep my a's on top of the a's, so I'm going to do the a's first. On the bottom I have an a squared, a b, and then a c squared. So that was step 1 and step 2. Step 3 now tells me I need to go ahead and simplify. And I actually like to do step 4 before I do step 3. So I like to find my EVs first. So my EVs, my excluded values, I have to look at my denominator. And in my denominator I have 3 different variables. So I know I'm going to have an EV for each variable. So my A's, since this is multiplying, remember, you can't multiply by 0. So my a can't be 0, my b can't be 0, and my c can't be 0. I like to do my EVs first because now when I go to simplify, some of those variables might actually not be in the denominator anymore, but they were in the original problem, so we cannot have them be 0 still. So now we're going to simplify. I know right away I'm going to deal with the numbers. Remember, 80 and 120, those are not exponents, so we don't subtract those, we simplify them. So I know that I can cross off the zeros right away, and I would be left with 8 over 12. But I can simplify that even more. I can divide that by 4, which is going to give me 2 over 3. So I know the fraction I'm going to be dealing with is 2 over 3. Now I just have to figure out what variables I have left. So I have an a to the imaginary 1 divided by a squared. Remember, when we divide, we subtract the power. So I do the bigger minus the smaller, and it goes where the bigger power was. So I have 2 minus 1, which is 1, and the bigger power was on the bottom, so it stays on the bottom. B's, I have a b to the third divided by b. So again, bigger minus smaller, so 3 minus 1 is 2, and the bigger of them was on top. So I have a b squared. And same thing with the C's, bigger minus smaller, so 3 minus 2 is 1, bigger number was on top. So that is my simplified answer along with my EVs. So let's look at example number 2 now. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to multiply straight across, multiply straight across. So when I do that, I do 16 times 3, which is going to give me 48. Now I have a g squared and a g squared. Remember, when you multiply, we add the powers, so I get g to the 4th. And then an h to the 3rd and an h is going to give me h to the 4th. Remember, there's that imaginary 1 there. Divided by 8 times 32 is 256. I have a g, an h squared, and an h, so I'm going to get h to the 3rd. And then a j squared. So I'm going to jump straight into the EVs before we simplify. So my EVs, looking at the denominator, only the denominator, I have g's, h's, and j's. And since we're multiplying, I know that none of these can be zeros because I'd be multiplying by 0, which would give me 0 in the denominator. So now we're going to go ahead and simplify. I'm going to pull the numbers out first. I have 48 and 256. Now you might have to go through some work here. I know that I can take an 8 out of both of these right away. So that's going to give me a 6 over 32. But I know I can always take a 2 out of this too. So I'm going to divide this by 2 again. I'm going to get a 3 over 16. There's no number that can go into 3 and 16, so I know that that's as simplified as it's going to get, and I'm going to leave that as my fraction. So now we're going to deal with our variables. I have a g to the 4th divided by a g. When we divide, we subtract, and it goes where the bigger number was. So I have a g to the 3rd on top. I have an h and an h to the 3rd. So bigger minus smaller. Sorry, h to the 4th and an h to the 3rd. Bigger minus smaller is 4 minus 3, which is 1 on top. And then I still have my j squared in the denominator. So those would be my 2 answers. So now we're going to talk about multiplying rational expressions with polynomials. And polynomials tells me that I have some adding or subtracting going on within my expression there. So we have to go ahead and do things a little differently then. So we are going to do a lot of factoring in here, a lot of factoring. Remember, the first step to factoring is always your GCF, so do not forget that you always take out the GCF first before you go ahead and do anything else. We know we have to factor if you have an x squared plus something else, so if it keeps going down. Anytime we see an x squared plus some more things, then we know we have to do some factoring. We have to use our x method. I like to then find my excluded values, so I actually like this one to be my number 2 step. Find the excluded values, and then I like to simplify the fraction. So I like to flip these two around. So I find the excluded values first and then simplify the fraction. Step number 4 is optional. It will get you the same idea, or the same answer, but you don't always have to multiply it back out. So let's go ahead and look at example number 3 here. I like to do this piece by piece, so we're going to do it piece by piece. I'm going to look at the top of the first fraction. I have x minus 5. I know that I cannot do anything to simplify that, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave that as x minus 5 on the top. Now, on the top of the second fraction, I have an x squared. I know that I can rewrite that as x times x. We are going to divide that by the bottom of the first fraction. Just x, there's nothing I can do there, so we're going to leave it x. The bottom of the second fraction, I see an x squared plus a negative 2 or minus 2. So anytime we see that, we need to factor this. So I'm going to multiply to negative 15, add to negative 2. It's going to give me a negative 5 and a positive 3. Remember, these two things give me my factors right away, so x minus 5 and x plus 3. So now, from here, I like to go straight into my EVs. I have to find out what values in the denominator would cause me to divide by 0. So I have an x in there. So for this first one right here, I cannot plug in a 0 because I'm multiplying that by some other things. And when we're multiplying, you cannot have a 0. So I can't have a 0 for that first one. For this piece, if I were to set that equal to 0 and solve it, I could not have a 5 because that would make the whole piece 0, which then I would be multiplying, which would make my denominator 0. For this piece, I would have a negative 3. If I plug in negative 3 in there, I get negative 3 plus 3, which is 0, multiplied by other pieces would be 0 in the denominator. So these are going to be my EVs, but I'm not quite done yet. I want to go back up and simplify now. So we can cross things off that are on top and on bottom, and they have to be the same. So I have an x minus 5 that can go with an x minus 5. I have an x that can go with an x. Now, I cannot cross off this x with this x because this one is an x plus 3. So it has other things attached to it. So I am done with my simplifying. My final answer would be x divided by x plus 3. Go ahead and look at number 4 now. So we're going to do the same steps. We're going to do the top of the first fraction, x plus 3. Well, there's nothing there that I can simplify, so we're going to leave it as x plus 3. Top of the second fraction is a 5. Nothing I can do there, so we're going to leave it as 5. Bottom of the first fraction is an x. Nothing I can do there, so we're going to leave it as an x. Bottom of the second fraction has an x squared plus something, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to factor this. So I have 12 on the top, 7 on the bottom. So two numbers that multiply to 12 and add to 7 give me 4 times 3. These two will be my factors then. X plus 4, x plus 3. So now I'm going to do my EVs first. Looking at that denominator, x cannot be 0 for the first one, a -4 for the second one, or a -3 for the third one. If you don't remember how I found those, come chat with me. And now we can go to our simplifying. So anything that's the same on top and bottom, we can cross off. I notice I have an x plus 3 and an x plus 3. That is the only thing I have. So on top, I'm still going to have a 5. Bottom, I will have an x times x plus 4. Now, this is a perfect example of an answer. I would take that as my answer, but I would also take it if you wanted to go ahead and distribute this back through. So I would also take x squared plus 4x on the denominator. Either one is good. Both of those would be fine answers. Example number 5 here, we're going to go through our steps again. So looking at the top, I have a y squared plus or minus something. So that tells me I'm going to have to factor that. So I'm going to get a -4 and a -3. Multiplying to -4 adds to -3, gives me a -4 and a 1. So I'm going to go ahead and get x minus 4. Sorry, those should be y's, right? We got a y minus 4 and a y plus 1. Looking at the top of the second one, I have a y plus 5, which I cannot simplify, so we're going to go ahead and leave it that way. Divided by, I have a y plus 5 on the bottom. Again, cannot do anything with that, so I'm going to leave it that way. And now this one, we're going to go ahead and try to factor this, but here's what you have to remember. We are always supposed to look for a GCF first. These two pieces have something in common. They have a y in common, so we're actually going to take that out. And if I take that out, I'm left with a y minus 4. There is no more y squared, so we don't have to factor. So from here, we're going to find our EVs. So we're dealing with y's, cannot equal this time. For this piece, it cannot be a -5. That would make that a 0. For this piece, it cannot be a 0. And then for this piece, it cannot be a 4. So those are my EVs. Now we're going to simplify and get our final answer. So I have an y minus 4 and a y minus 4, a y plus 5, a y plus 5. Again, I cannot take this y away from this y because this has a y plus 1. So my simplified answer is going to be y plus 1 divided by y on the bottom. So number 6 is going to be the same exact way. What I would like for you to do is pause the video, try it on your own, and then come back and check your answer before moving on. So here's what I got for my answer. If you got anything different, please go ahead and chat with me before moving on in the video.